Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Alex moved into his dream home, he sought peace and independence. Instead, he found himself entangled in a nightmare with Rick, a neighbor whose acts of theft, intimidation, and violence turned the quiet suburb into a battleground. This is a story of resilience, justice, and a fight to reclaim what's rightfully his. Alex, a meticulous and resourceful homeowner, recently moved to a picturesque suburban neighborhood. As an engineer with a passion for innovation, he had poured his savings and expertise into designing his dream home. Nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the house was an eco-friendly marvel, fitted with sleek solar panels, a cutting-edge smart home system, and a tall privacy fence that encircled the property like a fortress. For Alex, this was more than a house. It was a sanctuary, a testament to years of hard work, and an escape from the hustle and chaos of city life. The neighborhood itself was as idyllic as one could imagine. Pristine sidewalks lined with manicured lawns, neatly trimmed hedges, and rows of charming houses evoked a sense of order and tranquility. Most of the residents were warm and welcoming, eager to greet their new neighbor with smiles and casual waves as Alex settled in. Yet, amidst this veneer of perfection, one house stood apart, not because of its appearance, but because of its occupant. Directly across the street lived Rick, a boisterous, overbearing man whose loud voice and even louder opinions were impossible to ignore. While most neighbors seemed to fade into the peaceful backdrop of the community, Rick demanded attention. His garage frequently echoed with the screeching of power tools, his driveway cluttered with half-finished projects that seemed to go nowhere. Whether by design or sheer disregard for others, Rick's presence disrupted the otherwise serene harmony of the area. Alex's initial interactions with Rick had been cordial but strained. Rick exuded an air of entitlement, his comments dripping with thinly veiled condescension. "That fancy solar setup must have cost you a fortune," he'd remarked one day, peering over Alex's fence. "Hope it's worth it. People like us don't really need all those bells and whistles." Alex, unwilling to engage in confrontation, had smiled politely and returned to his work. But something about Rick's tone lingered in his mind. For the first few months, Alex enjoyed his new home without issue. The solar panels worked flawlessly, the smart systems adjusted seamlessly to his needs, and the privacy fence offered a much-needed buffer from the outside world. Then, one morning, he opened his utility bill and froze. The numbers didn't make sense. His electricity costs had nearly doubled compared to the previous month. Puzzled, Alex conducted a meticulous audit of his systems. Everything appeared to be functioning as expected. The solar panels were generating power and the smart home devices were operating efficiently. Yet, the inexplicable increase in usage persisted. Determined to uncover the cause, Alex began inspecting every inch of his property. It was during this inspection that he noticed something unusual. Near the corner of his lot, partially obscured by a patch of ivy, was a cable he hadn't installed. It snaked along the edge of his fence and disappeared into the ground, leading directly toward Rick's garage. The realization hit Alex like a punch to the gut. Someone, most likely Rick, had tapped into his power supply. Anger simmered beneath Alex's usually calm demeanor as he crouched to examine the cable more closely. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate theft. With steady hands, he photographed the setup from multiple angles, ensuring he captured every detail. The evidence would be crucial if this turned into a legal battle. Taking no chances, Alex disconnected the cable, sealing the end securely to prevent further tampering. As he stood there, the sun casting long shadows across his meticulously maintained yard, Alex felt a surge of resolve. He wouldn't let this violation go unanswered. What had begun as an idyllic chapter in his life was now marred by the actions of a deceitful neighbor, and Alex was ready to fight back. Determined to confront the issue head-on, Alex marched across the street to Rick's house the following afternoon. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the pristine lawns of the neighborhood. Alex's heart pounded as he approached the garage, where Rick was tinkering with some unknown project. A grin spread across Rick's face as Alex called out, though it was a grin laced with smugness rather than friendliness. "Rick," Alex began, holding up his phone with a picture of the illegal cable. "Care to explain why there's a wire running from my property to your garage?" Rick glanced at the photo, then at Alex, feigning ignorance. "What are you talking about, buddy? That doesn't look like my garage." His tone was light, but his eyes betrayed something sharper, more calculating. Alex kept his composure. "That's odd, because I just disconnected it myself. You've been stealing my electricity, Rick. I'd suggest you come clean before this goes any further." Rick's grin widened, now tinged with menace. "Come on, Alex, don't tell me you're one of those conspiracy nuts. Paranoid much?" He chuckled, crossing his arms. "Maybe those solar panels of yours aren't as efficient as you thought, huh?" Alex clenched his fists but refused to rise to the bait. "I have evidence, Rick. Stop this nonsense, or I'll be forced to take legal action." Rick's demeanor shifted abruptly. The fake laughter ceased, and his gaze hardened. Leaning in closer, he hissed, "You don't know who you're messing with. Stick your nose where it doesn't belong again, and you'll regret it." Taken aback by the thinly veiled threat, Alex turned and walked away. As he crossed the street, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this wasn't over. The next morning, Alex awoke to an unwelcome sight. His previously pristine white fence was defaced with streaks of red paint, crude splatters dripping ominously onto the ground. Worse, a note was tacked to his front door, written in jagged, hurried script. "Keep your mouth shut or else." Anger coursed through Alex as he ripped the note from the door. He had expected pushback, but this blatant act of vandalism crossed a line. That afternoon, he installed security cameras around his property, carefully positioning them to monitor every vulnerable spot. Days passed without incident, but Alex's vigilance didn't waver. Then, one night, his cameras captured something chilling. At around 2 a.m., Rick emerged from his garage, a flashlight in hand. He crept toward Alex's fence, carrying what appeared to be tools. Alex watched in disbelief as Rick dismantled a section of the newly repaired fence and reconnected a different cable, rerouting it to his property once again. Alex immediately called the police, his heart racing as he relayed the events unfolding in real time. When the officers arrived, Rick was already back in his house, pretending to be asleep. Confronted with Alex's accusations, Rick played the role of the victim to perfection. "This is ridiculous," Rick said, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "He's making this all up, probably staged the whole thing to get attention. You know, some people can't handle a neighbor who's a little more successful." The officers remained impartial, promising to review the footage Alex had provided. Still, the smirk Rick shot Alex as the police left hinted that this wasn't a man who feared consequences. If anything, it seemed to embolden him. Alex returned to his house, frustration gnawing at him. The battle was no longer just about stolen electricity. It had become a war of control and defiance. Rick wasn't going to back down, and Alex realized he needed to be prepared for whatever came next. Rick was not the type to admit defeat. After Alex's decisive actions to expose his electricity theft, Rick escalated the conflict in ways Alex hadn't anticipated. Days after the police visit, Alex received an official letter that left him stunned. Rick was suing him. The claim was as audacious as it was infuriating. Rick alleged that Alex's disconnection of the illegal cable had caused damage to his appliances and resulted in emotional distress. He further accused Alex of violating his rights by tampering with his property. The lawsuit was not just a nuisance. It was a strategic ploy designed to drain Alex's resources and paint him as the antagonist. At the same time, Rick embarked on a campaign to undermine Alex's reputation within the neighborhood. Rumors began to spread, fueled by Rick's whispered conversations with other residents during morning jogs and evening walks. He painted Alex as a paranoid and combative neighbor who couldn't mind his own business and created problems where none existed. Overheard conversations often included phrases like, "It's a shame, he seemed like a nice guy at first," and "he's probably just looking for attention." Alex noticed the shift in how his neighbors treated him. Friendly waves became hesitant nods and casual chats grew curt. The isolation stung, but Alex knew Rick's lies wouldn't hold up against the truth. A week later, Rick's schemes took a darker turn. One morning, as Alex prepared to leave for work, he found his car sitting unevenly in the driveway. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that all 4 tires had been slashed. The cuts were deliberate, precise, and unmistakably malicious. Alex called the police to report the vandalism, but without direct evidence, there was little they could do beyond filing a report. Alex was furious but undeterred. He replaced the tires and redoubled his efforts to document Rick's behavior. He He reviewed his security footage meticulously, ensuring every interaction and incident was preserved. Then came the most brazen attack of all. It was a rainy Friday evening, and Alex was driving home from the grocery store. As he approached a busy intersection, Rick's black SUV appeared in his peripheral vision. It happened in an instant. Rick sped forward, ignoring the red light, and slammed into Alex's car. The impact was jarring, the sound of metal on metal ringing in Alex's ears as his vehicle spun to a stop. Dazed but uninjured, Alex climbed out of his car. Rick was already out of his SUV, his voice loud and indignant. "Look what you've done!" he shouted, pointing at his crumpled front bumper. "You weren't paying attention. You're going to pay for this." Bystanders gathered, their murmurs adding to the chaos. When the police arrived, Rick wasted no time spinning his version of events. "He ran the light," Rick insisted, gesturing wildly at Alex. "I tried to stop, but he just came barreling through." Alex, though shaken, didn't let Rick's theatrics rattle him. He calmly explained his perspective to the officers and directed them to his dash cam and home security footage, which captured his departure from the grocery store and his adherence to traffic laws. The turning point came later that evening when Alex reviewed the dash cam footage. The video clearly showed Rick lying in wait at a nearby side street, revving his engine before deliberately accelerating into Alex's car. This wasn't an accident. It was a calculated act of aggression. Armed with this damning evidence, Alex presented the footage to the police, along with additional clips from his home cameras that revealed Rick's earlier acts of sabotage. The cumulative effect was undeniable. Rick's pattern of malicious behavior was no longer a matter of Alex's word against his. It was incontrovertible proof. For the first time since the ordeal began, Alex felt the tide beginning to turn. Rick's sinister plan had unraveled, and Alex was ready to bring him to justice. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Alex and Rick took their places at the plaintiff and defendant tables. Rick entered with a theatrical air of confidence, dressed in a crisp suit and accompanied by an equally smug attorney. His demeanor was calm, almost condescending, as if he believed the outcome was already in his favor. When the proceedings began, Rick launched into his performance. He painted himself as a victim of Alex's vindictive actions, claiming the disconnected cable had caused severe damage to his home appliances and even alleging emotional distress for his family. "I've lived in this neighborhood for years," he said, looking around the courtroom with a practiced expression of anguish. "I've always been a good neighbor, but since Alex moved in, I've faced nothing but hostility and aggression." Rick's attorney echoed these sentiments, arguing that Alex's behavior had been malicious and reckless. Their confidence was palpable, but Alex and his legal team remained composed, knowing they held a trump card. When it was Alex's turn to present his case, his attorney wasted no time dismantling Rick's facade. She methodically introduced a series of video clips that shattered Rick's claims. First came the footage of Rick reconnecting the illegal cable late at night, a flashlight clutched in his hand as he worked swiftly to avoid detection. Then came the dash cam video from the night of the car accident, showing Rick lying in wait before deliberately ramming into Alex's vehicle. The courtroom was silent as the videos played, the weight of the evidence undeniable. Alex's attorney followed up with witness testimonies from neighbors who had overheard Rick bragging about teaching Alex a lesson and using similar intimidation tactics in the past. As the prosecution unfolded, a troubling pattern of behavior emerged. Records revealed that Rick had a history of similar disputes with previous neighbors. In each case, he had exploited their hesitation to fight back, using threats and lawsuits to extort money or gain control. Alex wasn't the first target of Rick's schemes. He was simply the first to stand firm and collect irrefutable evidence. By the time Alex took the stand, the tide had decisively turned. Calm and articulate, he recounted his experiences, emphasizing the emotional toll Rick's harassment had taken on him. This wasn't just about stolen electricity, Alex concluded. This was about someone who thought he could bend the rules and intimidate anyone who stood in his way. "I'm here because I refuse to let that behavior go unchecked." Rick's once confident demeanor began to crack. His lawyer struggled to counter the damning evidence, offering weak objections that the judge swiftly overruled. By the end of the trial, Rick's attempts to maintain his innocence were transparent and futile. The verdict was a decisive victory for Alex. The judge condemned Rick's actions as malicious and calculated, imposing a significant fine to cover the damages to Alex's property and vehicle. Rick was also ordered to compensate Alex for his legal fees and emotional distress. But the punishment didn't stop there. The severity of Rick's actions, particularly the forged claims of damage and the deliberate car accident, led to additional criminal charges for fraud and endangerment. As the gavel fell, signaling the end of the trial, Rick's shoulders slumped, his bravado finally extinguished. Alex, on the other hand, felt a profound sense of relief and vindication. Justice had been served, and Rick's reign of intimidation was over. The court's decision was like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples throughout the neighborhood. Rick's defeat was the talk of every street corner, backyard barbecue, and morning coffee chat. The man who had once ruled the community through intimidation and manipulation was now a pariah. His reputation, carefully constructed over years of bluster and deceit, lay in tatters. The revelations from the trial ignited a flood of confessions from neighbors who had quietly endured Rick's antics. Stories emerged of Rick bullying newcomers, sabotaging properties, and issuing thinly veiled threats to anyone who dared oppose him. One neighbor, Mrs. Grayson, shared how Rick had pressured her to sell her property below market value, claiming it was in the neighborhood's best interest. Another admitted to paying Rick to avoid legal threats over an imagined property line dispute. With Alex's victory emboldening them, the once silent victims found their voices. Rick, unable to withstand the mounting scrutiny and ostracization, quickly put his house up for sale. The once pristine lawn grew overgrown, and the for sale sign stood as a silent reminder of his fall from grace. Within weeks, he had packed his belongings and left under the cover of night, his departure marked by a collective sigh of relief from the community. For Alex, the aftermath brought a mix of emotions. The fight had been draining, but the outcome was worth every sleepless night and a moment of doubt. His neighbors, many of whom had initially been wary or even distant, began to approach him with gratitude and admiration. "Thank you for standing up to him," one man said, shaking Alex's hand during a block party. "I wish I'd had the courage to do the same years ago." Mrs. Grayson brought over a homemade pie, her wrinkled face lit with a grateful smile. "You've done more for this neighborhood in a few months than anyone else ever has. You've given us our peace back." What surprised Alex most was the way his actions seemed to unify the community. Once fractured by Rick's divisive behavior, the neighbors started to come together, forging bonds that hadn't existed before. People who had previously avoided eye contact on the street were now exchanging friendly waves and stopping to chat. Block parties became more frequent. Children played freely in yards without fear of retaliation for a stray ball crossing the wrong boundary, and the neighborhood felt alive with a renewed sense of trust and camaraderie. Alex, though humbled by the attention, never saw himself as a hero. "I just wanted to protect what was mine," he often said when thanked. But his actions had gone beyond personal defense. They had set a precedent. He had shown that standing up to bullies, no matter how daunting the fight, could lead to meaningful change. Rick's departure marked the end of an era, and Alex's triumph became a defining moment for the neighborhood. Over time, the community continued to flourish, and Alex's house, once targeted and vandalized, became a symbol of resilience. The tall fence now stood not just as a barrier for privacy, but as a reminder that justice and integrity could thrive even in the face of adversity. As the dust settled and life in the neighborhood returned to normal, Alex often found himself reflecting on the battle he had fought. What had begun as a struggle to protect his property evolved into something far more profound, a stand against manipulation, deceit, and unchecked arrogance. Sitting on his porch in the evenings, with the warmth of the sunset spreading across the yard, he recognized the deeper significance of what he had achieved. Alex had learned that protecting one's rights wasn't just about self-interest. It was about setting boundaries that others could respect and showing that intimidation had no place in a community. He realized that by standing firm, he had not only safeguarded his home, but also inspired others to confront their fears and take action. It was a reminder that even in a seemingly perfect neighborhood, injustices could lurk, waiting for someone brave enough to challenge them. The moral of the ordeal was clear to Alex. Facing injustice, no matter how daunting, was essential for fostering a sense of fairness and mutual respect. His neighbors, once hesitant and divided, had found strength in his determination. The unity and camaraderie that had blossomed after Rick's departure were proof of how one person's courage could ripple through an entire community, breaking down walls of mistrust and building bridges of understanding. Looking out at his now peaceful street, Alex felt a profound sense of fulfillment. His fight had been difficult and draining, but it had reaffirmed his belief in resilience and integrity. Sometimes, Alex thought, the right path isn't the easiest, but it's the one worth walking. In the end, Alex's journey wasn't just about defeating a single adversary. It was about showing that standing up for what's right, no matter the odds, could create lasting change. The neighborhood he called home was now stronger, friendlier, and more united than ever, a testament to the power of courage and justice.